Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Ed Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video. Join the Rabyd Nation, a nation of people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. Today I am continuing on the Bible study Heroes of Faith, where we are looking at the list of the heroes of faith that the writer of Hebrews uses as examples of people of faith. We're asking the question, what does the writer of Hebrews, what did he think makes this person a hero of faith? And why is he using these people as heroes of faith? What is his overall objective? And today we're looking at the character of Joseph. Hebrews 11:22 says this: By faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. So you too can become a hero of faith by putting together proper funeral arrangements. It seems strange, given the more epic nature of some of the things the character of Joseph does in the story, that this is picked as the thing that the writer of Hebrews wants us to remember about Joseph. But it does make sense when we really look at the idea that he is talking about continuing to believe despite the unfulfilled promises of God. I mean, when we look at Joseph's life, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. Despite his vision, his vision of them bowing down to him, Joseph could have had some reservations about that. He could have used that, except that prediction actually comes true. And Joseph, actually sees the fulfillment of that promise that his brothers, his mother, and his father would come and eventually bow down to him, which seems strange to them given the nature of their society. We also could have used how Joseph was faithful in the face of Potiphar's wife. Her temptations, come lie with me, and then he refuses, and so things go very badly. But that's not really what the writer of Hebrews is looking for, because in the end, everything worked out for Joseph, despite this seeming setback. And he becomes a person that's kind of a hero in standing up to temptations. We could also use the prediction of his 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, but that also was fulfilled in Joseph's lifetime. The issue for the writer of Hebrews is to pick out things in these characters' lives where at this point, he's talking about unfulfilled promises. And the only unfulfilled promise that Joseph really receives in his life is in the story. He is told that eventually his family would become a great nation and they would leave the land of Egypt. They would return to the land that God had promised to Abraham. Okay, so this is what the writer of Hebrews is actually looking for. A promise that any of these people had that they didn't receive. In fact, they had to die without receiving it. In fact, this becomes a real theme of the writer of Hebrews when he talks in Hebrews 11. Joseph dies, never seeing his family or nation come out of or leave Egypt. But he does, in faith, so to speak, leave instructions that his bones should never be buried in Egypt, a thing that he never sees fulfilled himself, but rather they should be kept in such a way that when they do leave Egypt, that he is taken with them and buried in the promised land. Now this fits perfectly with the theme the writer of Hebrews is trying to get across. Just because God hasn't fulfilled his promises to you doesn't mean that he won't, or doesn't mean that there's something lacking in those promises. The real problem is, Joseph had faith, and if you're backing out of this faith, at this point, that's your problem because you don't have enough faith like these heroes. Now, this is pretty typical religious stuff. If the promises of a religion don't pan out, it is never the fault of the religion. It is the fault of the practitioner, the person, and Christianity is no exception to this. In the case of Christianity, I always used to point out, the fact that maybe you're not doing it right, so to speak, okay? In this case, when you look at the promises of Christianity, if you take the character of Jesus, Jesus is a very apocalyptic preacher. He makes it very clear that many of his disciples would not see death until his return, and then he would return. He makes that very clear an abundance of times, And he was definitely wrong about that. You never see that. Now, Christians today, of course, make, the kind of claim that Peter makes, well, God is not slack concerning his promises, but he wants everybody to be saved. And that kind of rationale can be used ad infinitum into the future. Because now you're saying, well, whenever God decides will he'll return. The writer of Hebrews is dealing with the situation of a whole bunch of people are leaving the faith, particularly Hebrew Jewish believers are leaving the faith and going back into Judaism because they are rightly concluding that Jesus was a false prophet. He prophesied something and it didn't come to pass, and according to the Old Testament, such a person should be ignored or stoned or whatever. And in this particular case, Jesus is already gone, so they can't stone him. So we just need to chalk him up as a false prophet and walk away. And I think that was the mentality of a lot of the Hebrews at the time, that this apocalyptic movement was coming to an end and it wasn't working out for everybody. So some Hebrews were rightly assessing that Jesus might be this false prophet, that it was another messianic figure that failed. But the narratives of the Christian religious leaders is changing at this point. It's interesting that the writings, the things that are attributed to Paul but probably aren't, the later writings by the epistles, such as the Second Peter, are all trying to make the excuse. They're coming up with excuses as to why this promise of Jesus' return isn't being fulfilled. And the writer of Hebrews is no exception to this. He's trying to convince the Hebrew believers to stay and saying, listen, you see all these other people that didn't receive the promises in their lifetime. There's no reason to think that we're not just like them. Okay, and so you also have, maybe Jesus is predicting in the future and we misunderstood him. There's always this feedback loop in religion that if the promises and exaggerated claims aren't fulfilled, then it's the fault of the believer. It's never the fault of the religion. The religion is always true. And this is no exception in the case of Christianity. They even go, you might even say when you look at Paul's writings, like the ones that are definitely attributed to Paul have all this promise, Jesus is coming back, Jesus is coming back, Jesus is coming back very soon, based on his own prediction. He's looking at what the words of Jesus might have been, hearing the stories at least, and saying, yes, the resurrection of the dead is at hand. If Jesus just raised, he's the first fruits, and the resurrection is going to be very, very soon. And when that doesn't come to pass, you see the later writings of Paul, which probably aren't actually written by Paul, kind of tone that back a little bit and start to make it seem like, God will do this in his own good time. And so it becomes a little bit more problematic. But you see this also with later writers like the writer of Hebrews or whoever wrote the Peter epistles. It wasn't Peter. And so you begin to look at these different works, and all of a sudden you see a different tone. When I did my master's thesis on the pastoral epistles, in particular 1 Timothy, I noted that the tone of the pastoral epistles is more about organizing the church for the future, okay? Which seems strange given the apocalyptic nature of the message that Jesus could come back at any time. It's almost like the people who wrote the pastoral epistles, because it's very problematic for Paul to have written them, are basically writing them realizing, okay, this religion of ours is going on past the promises of its original founder, and we need to organize it and keep it so that we keep going, for good or ill or whatever they were doing. And the writer of Hebrews kind of picks up in that vein too, in the sense he's trying to show Hebrew believers how Jesus is the fulfillment of everything, and that by waiting for these promises, you can show yourself to be a hero of faith just like all the other heroes of faith. So, in a sense, the writer of Hebrews is getting on this revisionist bandwagon, revising the understanding of what Christianity is. And in the case of Hebrews 11, he's trying to show that the real heroes of faith are people who believe, even dying, never receiving the promises that were given to them. You want to be a hero of faith, and if you're going to be a hero of faith, if you're going to be this person of great faith, then you have to continue believing even though the promises haven't come to pass. This is very typical of any cult whose founders make predictions of the future. You see it all the time, these little cults that rally around a person, and this person makes predictions of the end of the world, and then they don't come to pass. In the end, those same leaders will say, well, I just misunderstood. It's not the fault of God. It's not the fault of our religion. It's not the fault of our faith. It's the fault of our understanding. It's never the person, it's never the religion that can be said, oh, you made these predictions, it's false, so you're a false prophet. Oh, no, we just misunderstood them. Religion always typically does this when it has this predictive nature to it. You hear this. It's the part of the sales pitch that says, oh, the product is still good. You must have used it incorrectly. In deconverting, you have to really make the bold move of realizing that this is part of the sales pitch is actually the biggest lie, the biggest problem that religion has in it. You wake up to the fact that the product is actually crap, and it isn't you, but the product that has made a false promise or an exaggerated claim and hasn't lived up to that promise. It's the real emotional thing of accepting the fact that you've been conned, and it is the first step to deconverting, and it is the hardest step, usually because of all the sunk cost fallacy that goes into it, where we've invested all this time and all this energy into what's going on. And so the writer of Hebrews is still typically doing this. He's continuing to make this sales pitch that even though the promises of the apocalyptic founder Jesus and his later chief salesman Paul didn't come to pass. There's been no resurrection. Jesus hasn't returned. Even though that is true and these predictions have turned out to be false, we still should believe in this because we may have a faulty understanding, not realizing that at that point you're also saying that Paul and Jesus himself must have had a faulty understanding of what they were seeing. So was Jesus really God at that point, or was he just a man? And that brings up the question, and when the more you look at this, the more you can kind of push Jesus into this realm of a growing legend, that maybe there was a human figure at the beginning of this, maybe, not proven, and all of a sudden you move on to different things in this. So it's the understanding that you've been conned, okay? Now, what the writer of Hebrews wants us to believe is that you can make good funeral arrangements about the future, and somehow that makes you a hero of faith. But when you recognize that the entire story of the Exodus is probably made up and is an act of revisionist history, in my opinion, itself by the Jews living in the 6th century BC who were trying to justify their returning to Palestine and taking over that area, saying that that land was theirs, promised by God, is a pretty bold move, I have to admit. But you're seeing this with the writer of the Hebrews as well, trying to justify why the promises of the religion haven't been fulfilled. So when these ancient people are writing this stuff, putting together the mythology of the Exodus, they are also revising history, and Joseph is part of that revision, because one of the things you can then say at that point is it's easy for Joseph to make a prediction about the future if the same people that are writing Genesis are also the same people putting together Exodus and all the rest of the Pentateuch. It's easy to make that coherent thread of Joseph making a prediction about his bones, and then in the first few chapters after all the plagues and stuff in Exodus, you have that fulfilled when the person making the prediction and the person showing the fulfilled prophecy of it are the same people knitting together a narrative. Okay, and once that scale comes off your eyes that the Bible is a very human book, then that is something that you begin to find really easy to deconvert from. So, the writer of Hebrews is just another one of those, shall we say, apologists trying to keep people in the faith, even though the promises haven't been fulfilled, by pointing to people like Joseph who acted knowing that they were going to die, never seeing those promises fulfilled. Those become the heroes of people of religion that, still acted in their faith and in their religion, even though it turned out that the claims of the religion turned out to be false. So that's kind of the Bible study for today. As always, this is a discussion starter. So I would be interested in your comments on Joseph and so on, anything in this Bible study that you think is related. I always appreciate reading your comments. Thank you very much for stopping by, and I appreciate every like and share. I also want to give a shout out to my members, to my citizens, and to my Rabyd citizens. You guys are what makes this channel really work for me. It really motivates me, so thank you very much for your support. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. And then you should thus spend your time, your money, your energy on the things that build yourself up, build up the relationships between you and the people you love and care for to make this a better world. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith, because they're false promises, exaggerated claims, and a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.